Hello folks, it's Anahita Rao, and I'm going to speak to you today about a couple of things. The first topic is actually something that comes up quite a bit when I have readings with people, and that's basically questions related to serious relationships and marriage. Yeah, it's quite inevitable that they will arise. Such as when or if you will get married, how long will the marriage last, will it be a happy union? Of course there are a few typical combinations where marriage can be delayed or in rare cases denied. But in the era that we live in, many people can expect to marry more than once, especially if they're married for the first time in their 20s. And then others prefer to opt for unmarried, live-in, committed relationships. So nowadays, denial is generally choice-driven rather than a forced circumstance. Yeah. And unless you're from a very sheltered background, it's not really predestined, as it perhaps once was, when there was little choice and little freedom in society. In these times where the profession and the personal lifestyle become a lot more important, marriage is not really mandatory anymore, and it's not, for many people, the biggest priority anymore. But remember, if marriage is essential to you, then you can opt for it at any stage of your life, whether you are 30 or whether you are 70. Either way, to see whether there's a delay in marriage, there's a number of factors that we can look at. So let's discuss them here. Yeah. Now, before I talk about the technical bit, the astrology, the factors, including planets, combinations that delay marriage, I want to point out some obstructions that most commonly show up, mostly in the mind. So people can sometimes get stuck on factors that cause unnecessary blocks to marriage. For instance, what city their partner is from, what religion do they practice, what is their family background, what profession do they practice, what is their age, what is their bank balance, and of course, the age that we live in. Another factor to think about is virtual relationships. Is your perception of the person even close to reality? How often have you met? And online is not what I'm talking about, right? So these are some hindrances that inevitably will, of course, lead to delays. So you have to be watchful for this. Rather, the real test when we look at charts and match them is the karmic connection strong enough to bring the two people together, and then, of course, for them to stay together. So generally speaking, we look at the Lagna chart, the moon chart, and the D9 Nivamsha in a horoscope. And also, very important is the dasha sequence of both people when they meet, when they start the relationship. This is very important, and often this is actually overlooked when you're doing an assessment of compatibility. Timing really is everything. You can be in a positive dasha, and your partner can have 10 flaws, but things in life are going smoothly for you. So you may not even notice one of those flaws. Conversely, you can be in a challenging dasha, and not only do you see the 10 flaws that they have, but you imagine even more flaws that perhaps don't even exist, but they get exaggerated in your mind. So this is yet another block that you can create for yourself, which leads to delays in marriage or serious partnership. Okay, to begin with, let's start with the basics. So what are the houses to look at? Well, 7th house, of course, is the main and the most important house to be examined, as that's the house of committed relationships. Then there is the second house, which is the house of family, and the 11th house, which is the house of desire. I also see the 11th house for second marriages, as well as the 8th and 9th and their lordships. Yeah. I would say also look at the 4th and 12th house. The 12th house, remember, is used to calculate the Upada Lagna, again, signifying partner, whereas the 4th house is the house of happiness, of your domestic life, your home together. So now let's talk about the planets that are responsible for marriage delays. There are Sun, Mars, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, and a malefic moon, which basically is a moon that is very, very close to Amavasya, so it's very, very dark. Now, all of these planets have to be impacting the marriage houses. How? Well, first, if they sit in the 7th house, they will cause a delay. Second, if they aspect the 7th house, they will cause a delay. Third, if these planets impact Venus, the Garaka of marriage, which is the natural ruler of 7th, they will also delay marriage. Fourth, if these planets sit with or aspect the 7th Lord, they will delay marriage. So as you can see, there can be so many combinations for marriage delay, right? It really just, how do you tell if you can overcome that? Well, you have to look at the dasha sequence you're going through when you're ready to get married. Now, out of all of these, the most impactful, I believe, is Saturn, and also Ketu. It's very close second, which can delay or deny marriage. And if these two planets are impacting the 7th house, this can also cause separation. The most challenging can be Saturn sitting in the 5th house, because it's aspecting both the 11th and 7th houses. But if it's sitting in the 7th house, it's slightly better, okay? Because if you wait to postpone your marriage till your 30s, then that's actually a better combination if it's sitting in the 7th house, because it will bind that marriage, it will protect it. As long as it's mature, which is why I said 30s. The other minor exception, it's not a major exception, it's a minor exception, is if Saturn is your yogic planet, then also the impact may not be as bad, because the energy and the nature of that yogic planet is actually giving you favorable things in life. Yeah, so it's a sort of a balance. Another thing to look for is combustion of planets. So if the 7th Lord or Venus is close to the Sun, then this may cause delay in marriage, but normally this is not a denial. In a woman's case, also see if Jupiter is too close to the Sun, because this can delay marriage, because then Jupiter gets combust. Yeah. All right, so besides combustion, also pay attention to retrograde status, debilitation, affliction by the nodes. That's something that's often overlooked. Or planets involved in planetary wars. These issues can delay marriage, but I would say that they don't normally deny. Another factor is the hemming of the 7th house or the 7th Lord. Hemming of the 7th house by malefics. For example, the 6th and 8th house contain malefics. That can hinder marriage or create a loveless marriage with more focus on the professional life. Back to the retrograde status, I find in my experience, if Jupiter is retrograde, it can be problematic for women and can certainly delay marriage and even childbirth. Affliction by the nodes to the 1-7 angle is also difficult, especially in the era that we live in, because the nodes are very active in the era that we live in. And if they are impacting your 1-7 angle, well, delays will definitely be there. So expect delays into your 40s. Yeah, and see this in the D9 as well. If it's not a delay in marriage, it's definitely a deep, deep dissatisfaction with it until you're in your mid to late 30s. Sorry, mid to late 40s. 40s, and that's when the nodes mature. So, now what about denial factors? Again, I think it's very rare that this happens in the era that we live in without a conscious choice. So let me give you an example. If the entire chart has a very strong dharma trikon, which is the 159 angle, the house is strong, the lords are strong, the person may remain unmarried because they want to focus more on themselves. For instance, that's the predominant energy, and how do you see if that's manifesting? Well, are they going through the dashas of those planets? Yeah, and therefore they're strongly getting, those angles are strongly getting activated. Also see the power of the ascendant and its ruler, as well as the moon. So if these three are well placed, problems in the chart are reduced in intensity. And even if you have malefics impacting the 7th house, the 7th lord, and Venus, the challenges can be overcome to a large degree. And of course, the personality, the environment, and the fitting in are already self-sufficient for these people if they have a strong chart overall, right? Like the foundation is chart, the moon, the foundation is strong, the moon, the ascendant, and the ascendant ruler. So perhaps they're already self-sufficient, and therefore they don't think that they're lacking in that area. So that's also a possibility. This is especially important because if these people decide not to get married due to partners and relationships being disappointing or unfulfilling or something like that, they may not have to face the physical hardships of living life alone. Because remember, a lot of people do get married for very practical reasons, which is to share your resources, your expenses. You know, you can have a much better lifestyle if you're sharing your expenses with someone. So this is a very practical reason to get married, and many people perhaps stay married because of that reason as well. So it's something you have to look at. If the planets in the horoscope are concentrated in fire and earth signs only, then this can delay marriage, because we need more water for a relationship, right, to prosper. All the factors that I mentioned, I would say look at them from the lagna, but then also examine each and every factor from the standpoint of the moon. The moon sign and its lord will give the emotional and comfort levels of the married state. Also examine the position of Venus relative to that moon. If it's in an uncomfortable axis, like the 6-8-12 from the moon, it may reduce the fulfillment in marriage. Now, I was recently asked whether there are some ascendants for whom relationships are easy and even lucky, whereas other ascendants' relationship pose a difficult aspect of life. Well, yes, this is indeed the case. For some, finding a partner is easier, and keeping the relationship more content is easier too. It's something that we can quickly analyze by looking at the planetary relationships. So let's start with Aries, whose 7th house is Libra, which is ruled by Venus. So are Mars and Venus compatible for marriage? Well, yes, of course, Mars being fire and Venus being the key. So essentially the oil that ignites that fire. So it's a natural match. For Taurus, whose 7th house is Scorpio, again, Mars and Venus blend very well. Though for Taurus, the equation is not as simple as Aries, because Scorpio has Ketu as a co-ruler. So it's very important to analyze Ketu's position in the chart as well. So what about Gemini? The 7th house is Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter. Well, Jupiter and Mercury don't necessarily get along. Mercury is fine with Jupiter, but not the other way around. But more importantly, being a dual house, it can also suggest two marriages. Again, you have to see what else is going on in the chart. Same is the case for Virgo, Pisces, and Sagittarius ascendants. Now, what about the remaining 4 ascendants? Cancer and Leo. Well, this is where the challenge and difficulty can arise. Cancer and Leo have Saturn as their 7th lord, as Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius, regarded as enemies. So both Cancer and Leos take a lot of time to search and find a suitable partner. They can experience a lot of doubts, fears, and frustration when finding someone, as they may feel that the person is their rival. Perhaps they don't understand them for that reason, or perhaps their natures are just too different for that reason. And this, to some degree, is indeed true. So what about Capricorn and Aquarius? Is it the same frustration for them? Because it's Saturn ruling these signs, the story is a bit different. But the challenge is the same, because again, it's an inimical relationship between Saturn and the Moon and the Sun. Saturn tends to think, Saturn gets less caught up in other people's flaws. So they may see those flaws, but they may accept them, unlike Cancer and Leo. It's more difficult for them to accept. Final factor to analyze. Well, it's very important to analyze in a Vamsha chart when you're talking about compatibility, when you're talking about delay in marriage. There's an easy technique called Rashi Tulya to use here. Yeah, okay. Now, in your own chart, in your D1 chart, the Rashi chart, once you've identified the signs falling in the 1st house and the 7th house of the birth chart, check to see if any planet gets placed in these signs in the D9. I'll give you an example. So, for instance, you're a Leo Lagna, and Aquarius is your 7th house. So have a look at which planets occupy Leo and Aquarius in your D9. If malefics occupy these signs of the D9, it can lead to delays in marriage, especially in the malefic planets. Dasha. Also examine Venus, the ascendant lord, the 7th house lord, and the moon in your D9. In which signs are they placed? Place these signs back into the D1 Rashi chart. If these signs occupy the 6th, 8th, or 12th house, then the concerned planets can cause a delay or denial in marriage, right? For example, Venus may be sitting in Pisces in your D9 chart, which is beautiful because it's an exaltation position for Venus. But then what if you take that Pisces and put it back into your D1 and you're an Aries Lagna, so it lands up in the 12th house? Could indicate loss of partner, right? Now this placement back into the D1 Rashi from the D9 also gives you an indication of the quality of the marriage once you're settled into life with your partner. Now, a very important factor that often gets overlooked in marriage is examining the dasha sequence. Extremely important. Something I mentioned earlier. For instance, if you've had a challenging dasha which denies marriage or is not connected to the 7th house, the 7th lord, or the 11th lord, or even the 2nd lord, in a beneficial way, then you can expect delays in marriage. Often what happens in delayed marriages is that the favorable dashas and the transits just come later in life. So that's all for now. Hope you found it helpful. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. And of course like, and of course comment. Cheers. Thank you, folks.